Hello, everyone. I hope you hear me well. We are very pleased to welcome you today with Ben from Batch. We are probably going to let a few minutes so that everyone joins us. I think we are probably attending around 100 participants, I think. Maybe we can start explaining what we are going to speak about today, and then we'll present each other with Ben. The aim of today is to give you the basics that concern the latest news about the voluntary carbon market. So we'll go into the several projects that exist today that are available on the VCM and their specificities. We won't go in all the details of all the projects, but just to give you a broad view of all the projects that exist today. We'll speak about the certifications. We'll speak also about the CRCF, the carbon framework, the European carbon framework that has been released recently, and how it's going to change the projects and the carbon credits in Europe. And then we'll focus more on the strategies of companies. So how they contribute to projects, to carbon credits, what are their strategies, and how they can inspire from the SBTi for their strategies, and what also does the CSRD, the CSR regulation in Europe influences the carbon credit disclosure of companies. So this is the idea for today. Do not hesitate to put your questions and answers in the chat. We'll collect all of these, and at the end of the session, we'll answer your question with pleasure. And yes, that's it. Maybe we can start presenting each other. I'm Louisiane Guezel, and I deal with the innovation stuff in EcoTree. What we do in EcoTree is that we restore ecosystems, mainly in Europe, and especially forests. And so we have a real sustainable approach considering carbon and biodiversity. So everything we do is for carbon sequestration and biodiversity preservation and restoration. We have several forests that we manage, around 1,500 hectares, and we do everything by our own with our foresters, our carbon experts, our biodiversity experts, etc. So we manage the whole forests that are financed, especially through carbon credits by our clients. We work with all types of clients, B2Bs especially, and it can be large group, smaller companies, and mainly European ones. That's it. And today we invited Ben from Patch. Maybe Ben, if you want to say a few words about yourself and your company.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Louisiane, and thanks, EcoTree, for having me on today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So Patch is essentially building the software infrastructure layer to help scale the voluntary carbon market. So on the supply side, developing software to help project developers manage their inventory, find different sales channels for their credits, and then on the demand side, helping buyers access those projects in our network through sort of spot transactions or multi-year offtake transactions. I sit on the climate strategy team, so helping buyers navigate the carbon markets, the various different corporate climate claims that are out there, and matching up those targets with our diverse project network. And I spend most of my time trying to help sort of move companies away from spot and towards offtake, because I have a background in project development finance. So spent 5 years at Mirova, the sustainable investment arm of Strategist, sort of investing in early stage carbon projects. So yeah, that's me. That's Patch. Looking forward to the discussion.
All right, great. Thanks, Ben. So we're around 100 participants. So let's dig in the subject. We'll start now with a first part that concerns the projects and how the projects and the carbon credits related to these projects are changing now and what exists today. And then we'll focus more on the contribution strategies of companies. So let's start with the carbon credits. Just first reminder for the people that still don't know a lot about carbon credits. So we have two types of carbon credits. We have avoidance and sequestration credits. So the idea is that a credit is a certificate that is 1 ton of CO2 equivalent that might be removed thanks to a project, sequestered, or that might be avoided thanks to a project. And the project might be tech-based, so relying on technology, or nature-based, so relying on the preservation, restoration of nature. These are the two first things to have in mind: avoidance or sequestration, and tech-based or nature-based. And so we'll present a few examples today. But you might have, for example, in terms of avoidance credits, a tech solution, a credit that would be related to a tech project that can be cook stove. So cook stove implemented in southern countries that avoid to emit from the use of other type of stoves that would need energy, different type of energy and fossil fuel energy. It can be also related to nature projects. So, for example, we can avoid emission thanks to soil emission reduction in an agricultural project, for example. We have removal credit, so sequestration credit, it's the same. That might be thanks to afforestation, so planting and sustainably managing trees. And we also have technology called projects such as direct air capture, which is a technology that sequesters carbon. We'll go a bit more into details of, about these types of projects. And I let the floor to Ben, that is going to give you more information.
Yeah, awesome. Broadly speaking, at Patch, we tend to align ourselves with Oxford University, who have released these principles for net zero aligned offsetting. And broadly speaking, not diving into too many of the details, it talks about portfolio theory and how we need a range of solutions in order to achieve our goals. And in the early years, sort of your avoided emissions that Louisiane just spoke about, like your cook stoves, your sort of nature conservation, are incredibly important because they are at scale today and available. Over time, we need to shift companies towards more carbon removal with sort of lower risk of reversal. So your high integrity nature restoration projects, and indeed your sort of technology driven carbon removal type projects. And I think we're going to go through a few different project examples now. So the first, I think, is on the nature-based side. So this is Kattingan is a REDD+ project, one of the biggest on the market. REDD+ has had a difficult time over the last couple of years through various different sort of investigations from the Guardian, but it is a very important mechanism and the only mechanism that we have to protect standing forests. And this particular project is protecting sort of 150,000 hectares of biodiverse peatland ecosystems. It's also highly rated sort of by Silvera tier 1 and B0 as a AA. I don't know if you know much about the how rating agencies operate, but they're like the sort of Moody's of the bond market. So they rate carbon credits. And if you're looking to support a REDD+ project, given the criticisms that are out there, we would recommend looking to rating agencies to ensure that you're supporting the highest integrity project that you can. And this is one of them. And then on the right, we have a sort of a mangrove restoration project in Pakistan. So looking to restore up to 350,000 hectares of degraded mangroves in Pakistan, sort of doing that bit by bit. Really, really interesting project, and one of the most popular on the market. Blue carbon has a range of co-benefits, which I won't dive into because I could be here for hours. But yeah, I'll hand over to Louisiane, who's going to talk through a couple of the EcoTree projects that we're looking to onboard onto Patch, but haven't quite got there yet, but will be available in the coming weeks. So yeah, over to Louisiane.
Yeah, exactly. Just to because we frequently have this type of question coming from our clients. They don't really understand what is real protection of a forest. So what the project is really doing to protect a forest in concerning the REDD+ projects. Can you explain just a bit more what's really happening on the ground to protect a forest for a REDD+ project?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, it would vary project to project, but I've spent lots of time on REDD+ projects, and generally there's an NGO on the ground who is managing the area and working very closely with local communities in order to conduct patrols to ensure that there's been no deforestation in the region. They're often placed in regions at high risk of deforestation. So this one, Kattangan, is like placed right in the middle of a load of like palm oil fields. And so if it weren't for the protection that is being carried out by the NGO on the ground and the local communities, it's very likely that region would be deforested. And so that's like what the NGO on the ground and local communities are doing. And then you also have sort of remote sensing capabilities, which is like a development that we've seen over the last few years from companies like Silvera, who are able to like send over drones and LiDAR mapping to ascertain like how much of the land has been deforested, how well the forest is being protected. And so when you see a well-rated project by Silvera, you know that like what's actually being claimed by the project is getting like externally verified by another third party. Does that answer your question, Louisiane?
Yeah, I think it gives more information on what's really happening on the ground. So REDD+ project is trying not to deforest, making sure that the forest is not going to be deforested, and mainly thanks to putting patrols in the area. So what we do in EcoTree is also a nature-based project. So we just wanted to give you some examples of what we do as well. And so 2 examples here. So we do not try to avoid deforestation. What we try to do is sequestration. So we plant trees and sustainably manage trees. We really have this global and sustainable approach. We try to have an impact on degraded lands. So, for example, you have 2 examples here. One concerns burnt forests, and we have a lot of projects in France. So here are two projects in France. So one concerns a burnt forest. So we would there was a pine maritime forest that has been destroyed by the fires that happened in France in 2022. And so this project concerns 32 hectares on which we plant trees. And so we deliver carbon credits for that. So companies can contribute to the reforestation of burnt forests through carbon credits. Another example is bog forest. So there is an issue in global forests that concern bog beetles. So it's insects that attack forests, and it actually has a huge impact on forests. So what we try to do is to replant forests that have been attacked by these bark beetles. And this is also financed through carbon credits. This is about 25 hectares forest. So these were two examples of what we do in EcoTree, so nature-based sequestration projects. And then I'll let the floor again to Ben so that we can have more information on the tech-based project. So now you've had a few examples of nature-based projects that concern avoidance, so fight against deforestation, mangroves, and planting trees, so afforestation and sustainable management on destroyed forests. So Ben, you can present the tech-based projects, the main ones.
Yeah, sure. I'll try and go through these fairly quickly, but broadly speaking, we have like three different technologies here. The first is biochar, which is essentially taking forestry waste or agricultural waste and putting it into a pyrolysis machine, which is essentially an oven that burns at very, very high temperatures without oxygen, and where the carbon from the biomass binds into like a very carbon-rich char. It looks very much like charcoal, which you can then distribute on farmland, enhancing soil organic carbon content, reducing agricultural runoff, improving biodiversity. Really interesting sort of technology-driven solution whereby that carbon is bound in that char for hundreds of years. So there's sort of an increased permanence here. This particular project is called Carbo. They operate in Germany, one of the market leaders. They're also looking at like different applications for the biochar in like concrete and asphalt as well. So leading the market on that front. Enhanced rock weathering is the second here. So enhanced rock weathering is essentially taking mine tailings, so the waste from mining, which tends to be in Undo's case, this is basalt rock. Basalt sort of reacts with the acid in rainwater over sort of millions of years to form carbonate minerals, which then find their way to the ocean, and eventually that carbon is stored at the bottom of the ocean. But that's like the natural carbon cycle. What Undo are doing is taking that basalt rock, crushing it up into a very fine dust, and then distributing it on farmland. And so because of how it's crushed, the increased surface area means that the reaction with the acid rain happens faster, more carbonate minerals are formed, and then over time those carbonate minerals are sort of washed away into rivers and into oceans. So it's accelerating that natural carbon cycle, removing vast quantities of carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it for thousands of years. This, as I say, is operating operating in Scotland, in the UK. They're the first Puro certified project, and Puro we'll get onto in a moment, as is one of the sort of leading standards for engineered carbon removal solutions or tech-based. And then the final one is Octavia. So they are a direct air capture company operating in Kenya. So essentially building big machines that suck carbon out of the air and then bury it underground in geological form. It's a very sort of energy intensive process, which has faced some criticisms recently. But what's exciting about this project is that it's in Kenya, where the grid is powered sort of 80-90% by renewable energy. And so it's sort of a new frontier for direct air capture solutions. We're seeing lots of leaders like Climeworks in this space looking to set up direct air capture facilities in Kenya, and these guys are sort of leading the charge on direct air capture in the global south, which is a really exciting project. And then I think the next slide touches on some pricing dynamics. So sort of broadly speaking, like took a few pricing data from like the patch ecosystem, and you can see that like at the bottom here, your cook stoves and RED+, so like your traditional avoidance projects, are sort of around the $10 a ton mark. So much cheaper, much more available. And then we have ARR, so afforestation, reforestation, revegetation, which we touched on earlier, nature-based removals essentially, and soil carbon hovering around the sort of $30 to $50 a ton mark on average. Obviously, there's ranges there, and reforestation projects in Europe tend to be a bit more expensive, as Louisiane ran through earlier. And then you have the sort of technology-based solutions, which start at around $150 a ton and get all the way up to sort of $1,000 a ton, because these solutions are new, they are scaling, and they need funding in order to get to scale. And I think that the idea is that all solutions will level out at $100 a ton by 2050. That's what we're all aiming for. But obviously, you have the different stages of maturity of these different solutions, and therefore different price points, which I think Louisiane is going to touch on now. You're on mute, Louisiane.
Yes, thanks. There are several methodologies and projects that exist today. The idea of this slide is just to give you, so this is not really scientific, but it's just giving you what we believe is mature or not in terms of experience of the projects and in terms also of the methodologies that are released today. We see that most of the projects, the mature projects, concerns forestry, agriculture as well, and renewable energy, everything related to households, such as the cook stoves that we've been speaking about. And the technologies that are the least mature are more the direct air capture, for which we still have a lot of research to do, and the prices are still really too high. So it's still considered as less mature, and hence weathering as well, biochar as well. And concerning nature-based, there is still quite a low level of maturity concerning seagrass and the blue carbon, because there are still a lot of research on it, and it's quite difficult to know, to calculate exactly the amount of carbon credits that can be issued thanks to seagrass projects, for example. So this is just to give you a broad idea about the maturity of projects and certifications today. There are several standards that exist. We won't go into details now. There are some international and some private and national, it's private and national recognized standards. So there are some international standards. You have several of it on the slide on the left part, main ones being Gold Standard in Vera, probably, and Climate Action Reserve, American Carbon Registry as well. And then you have private and national standards, such as, for example, Bureau Veritas or Label Bas Carbone, which is the French standards. The idea is just to say that there are many standards that have their own methodologies and their own approach. What you need to understand is that it's important, and you need to take that into account. However, it does not give you 100% sure. It does not make you 100% sure that the project is going to be perfect. So the standards do not make everything about the project. You need to keep that in mind. It's important. It's interesting to look at the standard, but it's not everything. So, for example, we work with Label Bas Carbone, which is national, and Bureau Veritas, which is private. But we believe that these methodologies are adapted for our sustainable forestry and for our French forest-based projects. So depending on the project, it's a way of taking into account sustainability, its localization, the standards can or cannot be applied. And this is also why you can notice many standards on the market, because you have many locations, many type of projects, etc., etc. Here is a summary of all the projects that exist today. So keep in mind nature-based, tech-based, and for each one, avoidance sequestration. So in terms of nature-based avoidance projects, you can keep in mind the example of, for example, combating deforestation in South America. The advantages of such projects are, of course, that most of the time it's less expensive, that it helps to protect tropical forests, that it has also an impact on biodiversity preservation. However, as Ben was saying, it has been already subject to numerous media scandals. So you need to make sure that the project you're going to support is really additional, that it's really going to have an impact on carbon avoidance, carbon emissions avoidance. Then you have nature-based sequestration projects. So it could be planting and sustainably managing forests in Europe, for example. The advantages is that you can sustainably restore degraded area and have a positive impact, recreate a forest and have a positive impact on soil restoration, biodiversity restoration, the water cycle, etc. So you have many co-benefits, but these advantages are, of course, that it takes time to sequester because trees take a lot of time to grow. So the project takes a little bit more time. Concerning the tech-based solution, an avoidance project could be the solar cooker in Peru, for example. It's not very expensive. It can finance changes in energy practices in developing countries. So this has a positive impact on the local communities. However, it's probably more difficult to communicate to your stakeholders because it's most of the time a bit less understood, and there are not real biodiversity co-benefits. As the sequestration tech-based project, which is the direct air capture, same, there are few risks in terms of permanence and additionality. It sequesters very quickly. However, it's very expensive. It has no co-benefits for biodiversity or local population, and it's still not very mature methodologies. So each project has its pros and cons, and so you can have all these in mind. Let's take a few minutes on the CRCF. So this regulation has been developed recently by the European Commission. So we won't go in all the details of the CRCF, but just so that you know, it is handled by the European Commission. It will be launched in 2026, and the idea is to give a framework for European projects. The European Commission wishes to recognize projects and quantifications that are additional, liable, and they also add some sustainable guidelines. The European Commission will recognize some private and public certification. So there will be at the end CRCF carbon credits, CRCF compliant carbon credits. It's a voluntary framework. So it's developed by the European Commission, but it's still voluntary. So it means that companies can still buy carbon credits outside the EU. However, of course, if there are some EU-based projects that are CRCF compliant it will be probably quite more valued today by European companies. However, companies can keep on financing projects outside the EU, so that would not be CRCF compliant. And as well, the projects happening in Europe can also decide not to be CRCF compliant, and that's fine. In 2028, there will be also a European public registry that will be released. The idea is to have all the carbon credits happening in Europe that would be written on this European public registry. And finally, what you need to keep in mind is that there are still many things that are under discussion now. There are workshops happening until the end of this year. So what I'm going to present afterwards is still not really fixed. So which will be the projects that will be approved by the CRCF, or that can be valued through the CRCF framework. So we have 3 types of projects. We have carbon farming projects that are nature-based projects. So the activities that will be valued in Europe are the sustainable forestry, restoration of peatlands, agroforestry, reduction of emissions in agricultural soils, etc. So for these projects that are nature-based, the credits that will be issued are ton of CO2 equivalents, ex post net carbon removal, and soil emission reduction. So ex post net carbon removal or reduction. So both will be possible through this category of carbon farming. It's important to have in mind that ex ante, and sorry if there are some people that do not know the difference between ex post and ex ante, but basically ex ante credits are credits that value the fact that the project is going to sequester or avoid emission, but it still has not done it yet. And ex post is the opposite. So it will be possible to pre-finance ex ante credits, but these credits will not be recognized by the CRCF. However, a project can be CRCF compliant. So at the beginning of the project, it can be approved by the CRCF. And the credits issued from the project will be approved by the CRCF as well, only once they will be ex post. But still, it's possible to pre-finance ex ante projects. The European Commission is okay with this. And the ex post credits will be issued afterward, and these will be CRCF compliant. There will be monitoring also, on-site measurement, remote sensing, or modeling as well. And for now, the discussion is still going on, but at minimum, it would be 5 years of monitoring. It's probably going to be more for forestry projects, we guess. But this is the idea. Second category is storage in product. So storage in buildings, especially like if we integrate bio-based products in construction materials. This is ex post net carbon removal, and it will be valued until the monitoring goes, as the carbon farming as well. And finally, you have what they call the take-based or permanent removals. And this is about the technologies such as DAX, BECS, etc. So it's ex post net carbon removal, and the permanence of the project is minimum 200 years. What you need to keep in mind is concerning sustainability. what the CRCF asks is for nature-based projects, so carbon farming projects, to do not significantly harm analysis, plus to prove that the project has real co-benefits on biodiversity. These co-benefits are optional for the other categories, storage in products and tech-based removals. Okay, let's. I see there is a lot of questions, so we'll answer these at the end of the session. We hope you understood the different types of credits, projects that exist today. Let's dig in the evolution of the company's carbon strategies. And maybe Ben, if you wish to start.
Yeah, sure. So if you want to talk briefly about this broad shift from compensation towards contribution models. So we have various different like corporate climate claims at the bottom here, and their sort of perceived climate ambition working their way up the scale. I think on the far left, we have carbon neutral, whereby companies will neutralize residual emissions in any given year, but there's no sort of overarching standard. There's various different players out there that sort of claim to be carbon neutral, but there's no reduction pathway. So there's no mandated, like, you need to reduce your emissions by X, Y, and Z by 2030, 2050. And so companies are able to like continue business as usual and just offset or neutralize residual emissions. So it's faced a lot of criticism recently. And like with the sort of EU Green Claims Directive banning the term for products, we're seeing companies move away from this. And so climate neutral is another, as a sort of step up from that. It's like similar, slightly different. It's actually a company that has a program for reduction pathways, sort of reducing your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions aligned with their methodology, and then neutralizing your residual emissions year on year. Net zero is the one that we all know. This is sort of SBTi standard, whereby you have very strict sort of short to medium term requirements and long term requirements in terms of reductions of your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And then in your net zero year, you neutralize your residual emissions with sort of durable permanent carbon removal. Beyond net zero is this sort of, we're starting to get into the contribution realm here, whereby companies will neutralize their residual emissions and then go beyond that. So invest in additional sort of carbon removal solutions to go net negative. So, and then on the far right, we have sort of contribution. And this is sort of like a fundamental sort of change in perspective, whereby companies are forming a climate action budget in any given year. There's various different ways to formulate that budget, which we'll get onto a little bit later with an example, and then contributing that budget to climate action. And so you're not bound by a ton for ton compensation model. Instead, you have a total climate action budget, and then you allocate that budget to the most exciting or sort of novel or carbon removal or avoidance solutions that resonate most closely with your sort of value chain. Yeah, so it does away with the whole price per ton problem that lots of companies face. But and SBTi released this BVCM guidance, which provides like some sort of guideposts to help companies think through this. And I think Louisiane's gonna touch on that now.
Yeah, exactly. So concerning the SBTi, just a reminder on the several aspects that are given by the SBTi. So the SBTi is this international framework that gives recommendations to companies in terms of setting targets for climate action, and especially to be aligned to the Paris Agreement. And what the SBTi says is that firstly, you need to set near-term targets that are aligned with the Paris Agreement, then set long-term target, probably most of the time 2050, but it can be before. And for most of companies, long-term targets represent minus 90% of emission reduction by 2050. And to be net zero, to have this net zero target achievement, you need to have the compensation, the neutralization of your emissions in 2050. So it means that in 2050, your residual emissions needs to be compensated or neutralized. It means that if you decrease by 90% your emissions in 2050, then you have 10% remaining. These are your residual emissions, and these need to be neutralized. The SBTi has been changing a bit its mind, but what do the latest reports on SBTi say is that you need to neutralize your emission from 2050 and then every year. And this should be through sequestration carbon credits that would be permanent and sustainable. However, the question is also what to do before. And for this, the SBTi has created the BVCM, Beyond Value Chain Mitigation approach. So this is a table that explains you the two visions of the SBTi. So you have the neutralization on the left side that I was speaking about. This is the offset of the residual emissions for companies from 2050 or from the company's net zero year. The credits accepted according to the SBTi to neutralize the emission are sequestration carbon credits only. And however, it's from the net zero year that you should neutralize your emissions. And so the recommendation of the SBTi is before this, because we need to act for carbon sinks and for carbon sequestration before 2050, is to do BVCM strategy. So to implement a BVCM strategy, what is it? It's in the part of the right part of the table. A BVCM, so Beyond Value Chain Mitigation strategy, is a strategy for company to contribute to global neutrality in the world. So the credits accepted are all types of credits: reduction, sequestration, ex ante, ex post, all credits that are going to have an impact on the environment, the communities, contribute to SDGs. So, for example, the carbon credits issued from EcoTree are implemented in the BVCM strategy. So the companies that are aligned with the SBTi and involved in the BVCM strategy act from now until 2050 and beyond. And they need to define a 5 years contribution strategy. So it can be, the SBTi gives 3 examples of a contribution strategy. So there is the tone for tone approach. What is it? It's by volume. So considering the emissions of a company, it could contribute at 100% of its annual emissions, for example, or 50% of scope 1 and 2 and 10% of scope 3. The SBTi does not give a number, but they just give the fact to a few examples like this. So this is the first approach that is quite known already. Then there is the money for tone approach. The idea is for this approach to fix an internal price in a company, and depending on the emissions that are generated by the company, you could finance a portfolio of projects. So basically, the more a company is going to emit, the more it will have to finance projects. For example, a company could fix an internal price of $100 per ton. So for each ton generated by emitted by the companies, there would be $100 going to a portfolio of projects. And then there is the last possibility, money for money. And for this, there is a percentage of sales or profits that are generated by companies that are allocated to projects. So it's a percentage of the project of the profit going to a portfolio of projects.
Yeah, and I have an example of the money for ton approach that Louisiane just spoke through with one of Patch's customers. So this is a large European private equity firm. We've been working with them for a number of years. They used to operate on a compensation model, and we've worked with them to move towards a contribution model. They've set an internal price of carbon at 100 euros. And then they have taken their emissions in any given year, so their scopes 1 and 2 and scope 3 business travel, times that total volume by 100 euros a ton to get them to a climate action budget of around just over like 1.5 million. And then they've taken that budget and split it across a range of projects, not concerned about sort of the price per ton, but trying to drive innovation, which is one of this sort of private equity firms' like key values is innovation. And so they've gone with projects like direct air capture, biochar, Nova Carbo, that German project that I spoke through earlier, biomass like kelp biomass sinking, project called Running Tide, bio oil, similar process to biochar but slightly different, and then an innovative afforestation project in the US, and so it's a 100% removal portfolio. They this was actually before the BVCM guidance came out, but it's very aligned with BVCM. BVCM guidance only came out earlier this year. This was sort of towards the end of last year this purchase was made. But yeah, you can just see that like this is the broad sort of approach that companies can take to climate action on their way to their net zero year. Like we need to be removing carbon from the atmosphere today, and companies that rely solely on reductions are not doing enough. And so this BVCM guidance has given companies a couple of areas to navigate and look into on how they can formulate this contribution strategy, but it's something that we work very closely with companies on at Patch, and so happy to help anyone that's trying to think through it. Yeah.
Last part about the contribution strategies of companies is about the CSRD. So the CSRD is regulation that you probably know because there's a lot of communication on it, but I won't go in all the details, but it's a regulation that concerns European companies, and there are several norms, and especially the climate change norm, so the ESRS E1 that concerns climate change. And so the CSRD asks companies to report on some carbon credits strategies. So we will give you these informations. What the CSRD says, sorry, there's a lot of acronyms today. What the CSRD says on the E1 norm, about carbon credits. So it's the E1-7 part. If you look at the documents on internet, is that they ask to companies to give the percentage of reduction and removal projects, to give also the information on which projects are nature-based and tech-based projects, to give the information on the recognized quality standards. And for this, they are still a bit blurred, but probably the CRCF will be included in this. And the percentage of projects that are happening in the EU. And this is great because there's a lot of carbon credits that are issued. Actually, most of the carbon credits are issued in southern and developing countries. I think that's a great thing to have projects happening in southern countries, but we need to also finance more some projects happening in Europe, because we also need to protect and restore our ecosystems. Natural ecosystems. So it's great to have some requirements coming from the CSRD to disclose on the percentage of projects happening in Europe. The CSRD also is very clear on the fact that the carbon credits should not be included in the DR6, so in the reporting that concerns the reduction of the emissions. These are two separate things. And they agree that the carbon credits are a great way, a useful contribution towards mitigating climate change. So you've understood, we hope, the basics in terms of which credits and projects exist today, what are their advantages, the pros and cons, what are the differences as well. We've also been speaking about the CRCF, the evolution of the contribution strategies from compensation to contribution, what the SBTi says, what the CSRD says. Probably we're going to answer all your questions now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay. And we are going to answer your questions. So firstly, there was a question probably for you, Ben, about carbon credit rating agency.
Yeah, so there are a number of different carbon credit rating agencies. Patch integrates with B0 and Silvera, who are probably the market leaders. But then there's also Calix Global and Renosta as well. So I think there are 4 rating agencies out there today. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, concerning the Delta Blue project, could you please explain how reforestation will help local population to be at the temperature and air humidity increase in the future? Maybe it's quite a broad question, but if you want to.
It's a big question. I mean, blue carbon ecosystems in this particular project are incredibly powerful. 90% of marine life touches a mangrove at some point in its life. And so when you're thinking about like local population benefits, it's basically enhancing fish stocks, which is helping local fishermen to improve their livelihoods, reducing the need for them to deforest land for timber to make money in that context. I think so that's an example of a co-benefit to these types of solutions. In terms of temperature and humidity increases, that's a very big question that I would probably have to take offline to dive into some of the dynamics. But the exodus of population is definitely preventable and prevented by this project through the improvements of local livelihoods that restoring these mangrove ecosystems entails.
Okay. There were also some questions. So What's the difference between LBC and BV projects? So BV carbon credits that we generate in EcoTree. So these are two different methodologies. It's the name, of third-party methodologies. The way of calculating the carbon that is sequestered is different, and also the way of monitoring the impact is different. For LBC, you need to have an audit at 5 years after the project, plus another audit 20 years after. And for BV Bureau Veritas projects, we go on the ground every 5 years to monitor the scale of the trees, so that we know precisely what is the amount of carbon sequestered by the forest. So and there are other differences as well, but just to be broad, it's a way of calculating, and it's a way of monitoring the impact that is different. Bureau Veritas is also a private standard, and LBC is a national standard. Concerning the BARC project, it is a sequestration project. We do sequestration project in EcoTree. I think there was also there is a question that concerns reforesting burnt forest. And what would happen if the previous forest also had generated carbon credits? Well, what you need to keep in mind is that when we generate credits in a forest, we take some buffers to make sure that the project is really going to be permanent. So even if there is a burn in the forest, which we really try to avoid, there are some buffers so that the credits are still given to the company. So this is how it works for all the carbon credits. Don't hesitate, Ben, if you see some questions.
There's a couple on the contribution strategy that I wanted to quickly touch on. Gabby asked, like, would it be an annual budget or total, and how frequently would they reassess if total? And I think it's just important to note that this is an annual strategy, and every year they'll be calculating their emissions and then timesing that by their internal carbon fee and contributing to climate action year on year. And then another question was like, how are they communicating about this approach? And it's sort of in their annual impact report, they will talk about how, in 2023, company X has contributed to climate action by supporting the following carbon sequestration projects, and we'll list them out and provide a high level overview of each project, and we help them with that sort of that communication piece. So I hope that answers the contribution strategy questions.
Yes, totally agree. And also, if you decide to have a contribution strategy that is based on an internal price, of course you need to calculate your emissions every year and to know what is the amount of money you need to allow to a portfolio of projects. There was a question also, is there a partnership between EcoTree and Patch? Yes, there is. We are actually doing the IT and the administrative stuff so that we appear on Patch platform that gathers many types of projects. There were some questions also concerning sorry, there are so many questions.
Only 1 minute left.
Yeah.
I just wanted to confirm that like that on that sort of partnership piece, we like Patch works with a number of carbon accounting providers in France, and so French companies are looking to support French projects, and so we are developing this partnership with EcoTree so that we can get French projects onboarded onto our platform, and so that we can help French companies develop climate action strategies, be those compensation or indeed contribution. But I know
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and then I've been seeing that there are many questions also on the CRCF, etc. Don't hesitate to, because the time is already done, don't hesitate to reach us on LinkedIn and we can answer all your questions. Yeah, there's still a lot of questions that we have not answered, but thanks a lot all for your participation and all your questions. That very interesting to see that you are all motivated to know more and to dig in this subject. We are available, Patch and EcoTree, on LinkedIn, on our websites, to answer your questions. And yes, we would be pleased to keep on developing a project with you and to engage you in carbon sequestration and avoidance projects. Thanks a lot and have a good day, everyone. Yes, and maybe last thing, we both have a lot of other webinars and white books and guides on our website. So if you want to know more, don't hesitate to charge these guides on our website. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Louisiane. Thanks, everyone. Follow
Bye.
up. Cheers. Bye-bye.